Hello, everybody, and welcome to Hardpoints, the podcast about energy security and the startup economy and how they intersect to shape the world around us. Each time we meet here, we unpack the real dynamics behind the headlines, what's changing, what it means, and why it matters to you. Thanks for being here. Neal, how you been, buddy?
Good, sick, but visiting grandma. So, overall good. How about you?
I've been good, too. We're in this point of life here where, like, my kids are setting my schedule. And so this week was just full tilt boogie. Like, we ended up having like a scout camping trip. Also, my daughter was in a parade that they have here, the Halloween parade. So I had to get her back to that. Thankfully, the scout camping trip was close enough that I could do both. So I went and like did that for half of the day. And then I took my daughter to this parade. Then after the parade, I went back and, slept in a tent overnight, woke up, got Luke going in the morning. And then after that, ended up like cleaning the garage all day. So it was a very dad weekend, if you will.
If you'd told me in my 20s that I would be like racing back across town to go to what you just said, like the Boy Scout camp, like what you just described, I would have told you were nuts. But I totally know what you mean, because I totally would have raced back across town too.
Yeah. It was fun to see my daughter in the parade as well. So, my son is really enjoying the idea of kind of being his own man, and like he seems to thrive best when I'm not around, actually. So, which is kind of funny because, you get this social pressure to show up to all the scout things as a parent, and they expect, to contribute your fair share. But it's one of those things where a little selfishly, sometimes I don't want to be there because I know that like Luke's looking over his shoulder and he doesn't want me to, he's weirdly like reactive to like what I'm thinking. And it's like the moment I go away, he actually starts focusing on what he needs to be doing a little bit more. So
interesting.
Just how it goes.
There's a lesson in there too, though, right? I mean, actually, do you remember your first solo as a pilot?
I do.
Do you remember?
I got a story on that.
Do you remember? Do you remember smelling stuff that you never smelled before?
Mm-hmm.
There may be a weird parallel there where Luke is, he's 11. Is that right?
Yeah, he'll be 12 in a couple months.
Yeah. So it's almost like when you're there, you've got the pilot, covering for you. So you can do all the stuff, but you got like this sort of mental model of coverage or whatever that is, like mental state where dad is here. So I can be in one state of mind, and then if he's gone, I gotta actually, wait a minute, what's that smell? So if people are not familiar, you want to explain what that phenomenon is when you go for your first solo?
Yeah, it's so for everybody that's ever been a pilot, at one point or another, you have to cut the tie between you and the flight instructor, and they have a tie cutting ceremony where like you give them like you wear a necktie to this ceremony, and then they cut it, and then they take it almost like the trophy rack of antler from a deer or something. Anyways, so the first time that you go out for a solo, you get in your airplane, you taxi it out all the normal ways. It feels a little bit weird. I don't know what's going on there. Get to the hold short, call for takeoff. You get out onto the runway when they clear you for it. You get out onto the runway and you put your feet on the brakes and you throttle up the power, and you have this mental moment where you have to decide, like, the moment I take my feet off my brakes, shit gets real. I'm now going into the air, and I better be sure that I'm getting back onto the ground. And everybody has to do it at a certain point, and then you do it, and then you find out that you're going to be just fine. You know how to kind of take care of yourself in the airplane. Crazy things have happened there. I remember one story about a guy in a T-34 on his first solo. He took a bird strike through the windshield screen and ended up like, smashing his face up. So he kind of landed with one eye shut and one eye half open. But you know all the emergency procedures. You go through the thing. Like, you just have to have that degree of confidence in your own skill and your own ability, and the system that's brought you up and taught you that they wouldn't let you do this without it. And you do. And, thousands, maybe millions of pilots do that every year. So you can do it.
Yeah. Well, so the smells thing. Just to clarify what I was talking about there is that my first solo, you don't have that many hours in the airplane at that point, but you're physically capable of doing it. You don't have all of the, decision making around weather and systems and whatever, but physically you can move the airplane into the sky and back to the earth safely. And so they throw you out there. Just it's a confidence boosting thing. You've got a lot more flight instruction yet to go, but they throw you out there. And I think one of the reasons is what I went through personally was, I'm in the air and all of a sudden I started smelling things and feeling things about like that I thought the airplane was broken or something wasn't right, or maybe the fuel system was, maybe something was leaking. And like the, the, what I'm trying to get across here is all those smells were there before. All of the vibrations were there before, but I wasn't as aware of them because I had this safety blanket. I had the flight instructor who was there, who was going to tell me if something was wrong. All of a sudden, when it's just you've got to be your own blanket, right? You've got to recognize if something's wrong. And I think that's what I'm bringing it back to is like Luke, whether he knows it or not, it's a different frame of mind because Dad isn't there. Like subconscious though it may be, it's a different frame of mind.
Yeah. It did bring up a memory of my first solo as well. I was such a dumb shit and cocky enough to do such a thing. So for our era going through training, the very first airplane that you fly in the Navy Marine Corps training pipeline is the T-34. And so I was training out of Corpus Christi. You end up flying out over the water. There's some working areas just off the beach there. And the T-34 has it's a tandem cockpit. So there's a front seat and a back seat. And in both seats, the cockpit doesn't close by like some sort of clamshell mechanism, or you don't get in through a side door. It like just slides back. And so you can go like total like World War I style with the windows open. If you want to do that, it's a totally legal and approved maneuver. And so you end up going out and doing that. And so I was like, well, I'm on a solo. I'm just going to open go Red Baron here. And they very explicitly tell you no cameras in the cockpit. They don't want you to do anything like that. But of course, I brought my camera with me. A little like just, this is again dating myself. This is back in the day when you could buy those little disposable cameras with film, and then you could turn those in. So I brought one of those, and then of course, my dumbass decides that it'd be really great is if I took a picture of myself from outside of the airplane. And so I go to stick my hand out into the slipstream, and the T-34 is not a fast plane. It's a prop, but it's a lot faster in a car. And so when I put my hand out the window, it slammed it back. The disposable camera went flying. Probably landed somewhere in the water. And for the rest of the flight, I was all freaked out. Like, did I just do FOD damage? Like, am I going to come back and find like the indentation of a camera on the horizontal stabs, or is that camera going to float ashore and somebody's going to turn it in and see my stupid
somebody's going to find it.
I was
100%
freaked out about all that. So anyways, now that I'm safely retired, I'm willing to admit that story in public, but don't do that, folks.
Don't do that. That's good to go. Well, the other part of that from your story about bouncing back and forth is that as a dad now, I'm like, I don't know. I actually, there's nothing I'd rather be doing. I mean, I used to be all up into adventure sports and doing, mountain biking and climbing and going wherever. And now there's nowhere I'd rather be than, at my son's baseball game or supporting him doing, whatever the heck he wants to do. So, mindsets change, and, good on you for bouncing all over tarnation.
Yeah. It's, a similar feeling. This is what I want to go do. I want to be with my kid. I want to make sure that I've got these fleeting few years where they actually want me around. Luke, maybe not as much, but you want to go spend some time with them. You want to make sure that they're happy and set up for success. It brings to mind that I was reading the other day about how men's, we talk a lot about like the hormones of women, and about how like they have like these fairly major transition points, both through in puberty, but also, in menopause, and then like they have monthly cycles and all the foolishness about that. Foolishness is maybe not the right word, but like there's a lot going on there. And and actually men have like some pretty big hormonal changes as well. And that the two kind of major inflection points for a man of their hormones actually is around when they get themselves into a long-term relationship and when they have children. And it kind of makes sense from like this evolutionary standpoint. Like, you know, you don't want to be like the grizzly bear that like kills a kid, you know, sort of thing. Like, so, uh, it really does change who you are, like internally, like not just the workings of your brain, but literally the workings of your entire body to become a father.
Oh, that's fascinating. I had no idea. I mean, certainly in recognizing myself that I changed, but had no idea it was hormonal or,
Yeah, I went
you
down
know.
this rabbit hole associated with my father-in-law. As listeners of the show know, my mother-in-law passed away this last summer, and one of the things I came to realize is that the widower's experience is actually the most traumatic experience in like a in human systems or in human experience associated with the end of a relationship. Divorce is not as bad. Even the widow's experience is not as bad as the widower's. And the reason for that is literally is that men change a lot about themselves, like internally as part of a relationship, and that you don't see as matching a correlation associated with like women towards men. And I think about it sometimes about like how that's really like a big part of maybe the male loneliness crisis is about like we really are programmed um, to be to want to be part of a relationship, and that like that is how a lot of times we find our own fulfillment. So, anyways, that's how I got down there, down that rabbit hole. Is just kind of thinking about the experience of why is the widower's experience more extreme than the widow's experience. And you know, I think about it like also a little bit about like you know, evolutionarily, women were like, for example, one of the things I learned in this is that you and I, and pretty much every human on the planet, has twice as many female ancestors as male.
That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it didn't to me either. But it's the idea is that there's just so many men that never had a chance to kind of pass on their genes, whether they were killed in war or you know died from some sort of violent conflict, or you know there's certain societies where you know there are harems, for example. There was multiple women to every man. Yeah. So, anyways, so there's just a big part of like the male, like the reason we exist, to a certain extent, from an evolutionary standpoint, is to try to be part of you know, to find fulfillment is to be part of kind of a monogamous relationship.
Hmm. And what you mentioned the male loneliness challenge. What I mean, how does that the hormonal changes you just mentioned? Can you explain a bit more about why how that connects? How those two things connect?
I'm not a scientist, right? So I will put a huge disclaimer on this, which is this is just kind of
Hmm.
my own
Oh, but
interpretation.
you went down a study hole of like figuring shit out. So
I just think that there's a lot about like um, how men define themselves as being successful. And when they define themselves as being successful, it is as being um, part of a relationship. It's about being a father. And that as part of that, one of the things, the consequences associated with that is that men often sacrifice a lot of their own friendships. And so when they sacrifice their friendships for this, like this core central, you know, series of relationships associated with procreation, they find themselves without a whole lot of friends. Something like 70% of divorces are initiated by women. For college educated women, it's like 90%. And so I think there's this component of like some of these men, maybe they don't give as much to their marriage as maybe they should have. But like they find themselves without, in any case, if they find themselves on the back end of a divorce or as a widower, they find themselves without any sort of social network. Their social network was their family, and then when that family is gone or removed from them in some way, then they no longer have a. It's hard to find meaning in life, and I think that's my own interpretation about like why there's so much loneliness associated with men, and then also it's like such a high rate of suicide.
hmm. Yeah, I thought the direction you're going to go with that was men before, like in the dating scene, like younger men and, you know, not having as many opportunities to meet people in the real world. There's sort of the sort of online dating world and then, uh, fewer dates happening. Read some about that. Um, but yeah, didn't expect your, you know, also that stat that 70 and or 90% of divorces are initiated by women. That's surprising. I didn't see that. I would have guessed the opposite, actually.
Yeah. And not to say that like they're unreasonable divorces. Obviously I don't know anything about them, but just like, that's a
Yeah,
pretty,
it could be.
it is a lopsided number, associated with
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
You wouldn't have assumed any of that. I do think for like the younger set, like when I go back to like thinking about my own personal experience as a young man, like, uh, you probably had, I don't know, where did you meet your wife?
Well, we met in a bar outside of a military base. She was in the Navy and I was in the Marines. So,
Okay. Good job. You picked one of the few there. So, my experience when I was a young man is I was in a lot of these, Navy towns where there were a lot of men that were pretty good shape, had their act together. The gender ratios were all kind of messed up there. And so, like, it was very hard to find like dates where, uh, the women, if you weren't particularly, that were okay with dating a guy that was in the military and hadn't already had a bad experience with that, um, was willing to kind of be interested in having a very mobile career associated with somebody that was in the military, and pretty much putting their career, at least for a time being, second seat to their marriage. Um, and was, somebody that I found like, wanted to spend a particular amount of time with. Um, and so I just remember actually feeling fairly lonely. I was filled with like a lot of connections with men. All my coworkers. There was a couple female, coworkers as well, women that were in the service, but they weren't picking up what I was putting down. So Neal, you must have been one charming son of a bitch. But
well, I mean, this is after flight school. I was at Miramar for a while by that point. So no, I relate to that. It was like, especially through flight school, you're in these pretty small places without a lot of people at all. And then, yeah, the dating population is pretty small as well.
yeah, so I feel that too. Even though I was
Mm.
surrounded by friends, I also felt lonely. So I think there's kind of two
Mm-hmm.
sides of that coin, and about like
Mm-hmm.
how centrally, men's existence is in many ways defined by the women that are in their lives.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense. Well, yeah, that's an interesting. I think you've given me some stuff I got to go get smarter about. I just haven't. The physiological isn't something that I think a lot about, but it's certainly. I mean, it's clearly important. I think we're getting to. You look at like what Haberman talks about and how what he's helped me understand. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there, that's what's his name? He runs a podcast, Stanford professor. I want to forget his name, but anyway, I listen to his podcast sometimes, and it's like fascinating how diet, exercise, and what you're bringing up here, like hormones, etc., and impact the rest of us. It's not something I spend a lot of time
Yeah.
understanding.
There was a book that I read, recently called Different. It was a primatologist guy named Franz de Waal. He's, spent his whole career studying, our closest cousins, evolutionary speaking, the great apes associated with both, chimpanzees and bonobos. And they're an interesting juxtaposition. We're genetically, similarly related to both, but chimpanzees tend to be a patriarchy, very male centric, a little bit more violent, a lot of aggression associated with it. And bonobos tend to be a matriarchy, very sex focused. Like they're humping all the fucking time. But like the males kind of find themselves on the outside looking in a little bit. So it's interesting because you kind of look at like, hey, this is human society to a certain extent in both ways, and you look at it. There's places where men are highly centralized. And if I had to look at it, like I would say that human society is far more likely to, is more aligned with kind of the patriarchy, model, the chimpanzee model, if you will. But like within the bonobos, category, there's a lot of aspects there too, that I think are kind of fit into human society. So it's a really interesting book. Um, anyways, worth
Right
giving it a
on.
read.
And that was that was Andrew Huberman.
Oh yeah,
Sorry.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
the podcast is Huberman Lab. So my apologies. I said that wrong.
Well, there we go. Well, so we're 20 minutes into our catch up here because I've been wanting to talk about monkeys apparently and men. Maybe we're a little bit closer than we're willing to admit, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's because I was curious about your knowledge there. So thank you.
Yeah. So have you been paying attention to this gambling scandal that's been going on here, moving into kind of the current events?
Yeah, so a bit. If you haven't been following, there's a couple of NBA players and the mafia who decided to do actually a couple different things here. One is that they're part of a gambling ring in New York City that has been fixing poker games, and these aren't like your friendly neighborhood poker games. These are like people gambling millions of dollars at a time. And the basic premise here was, and this is only part one. There's two parts, but to cover part one, this was, you know, players would show up that could gamble millions of dollars. They would show up in part because they could play with NBA players like Chauncey Billups, who's, a pretty notable player, and also a current coach. But anyway, these mafia bosses would bring in NBA players. Um, those players must have been getting a cut because the games were no kidding rigged. These are like, machines who deal the cards. And then as a part of that, they could, the players that were in on it would know who had the winning hand, essentially. And it was like, it wasn't just a player. It was like a whole setup so that there was a quarterback and a person who would like give the signals, and they were wearing earpieces and like, it's like the whole thing is out of a movie. But bottom line is that, the mafia was making millions of dollars, and there are these very notable NBA players that were facilitating it, attracting these folks to come to the table and getting a piece of the action. And that's just part one. So crazy.
Yeah, I heard a little bit about like the tech behind it. So apparently, like they have these. If anybody's ever been to a casino and played like a card game, they have like the auto shufflers, and the auto shufflers themselves had a known security flaw that everybody kind of ignored. So the known security flaw was is these auto shufflers have a camera inside of it in order to be able to kind of look at the cards and make sure that everything is randomly put together based upon some sort of computer algorithm in it. But it had a USB connection to it where you can kind of program that, and there was a known security flaw that you could plug in a wireless thing in the back of that and have it transmit the data associated with it. But everyone's like, in a casino, that will never happen because you'll have all these, professional, security folks that are going to be reviewing cameras, and you've got the dealers, and you have all these checks and balances associated with humans there. Probably not the best assumption to have. Like, well, we can just rely on humans to make sure that cheating will never happen. But okay. But yeah, in these card rooms, the card rooms were in on it. This was how they would kind of run it, and so they would, they were happy to do this because they could take money off of it and they could run their own thing. And then the next part that I heard about it is that the wireless thing that they would plug into it would transmit to somebody that was out of state, and then they would send a signal to a phone. And so, like when they would send the signal to the phone, you're not allowed to like having played a couple of hands like like in a casino poker room. You're not allowed to look at your phone when you're next to the table unless you're out of the hand. And so then, like, what would happen is that somebody would fold, they'd look at their phone, and then they would signal to the other players at the table that you could, you could do the take on these guys. Really involved and kind of out, like the fact that like they had this known security flaw, like they were just like begging for this to happen, like from the tech side of things, which is just baffling to me, like why they didn't like want to do more with that.
Yeah. Also, like, I don't know this. Of course, I've got now in this image in my head of, these are probably finance types who can afford to gamble $1 million in one night. But also, like, where do you go? Who wants to play a game like that? I don't know. That seems crazy to me. And then two, where do you go for for a game that's like that rich and exclusive? I don't know. But in any case, this is not a small operation. This is tens of millions of dollars. I find it, really crazy to me that somebody like Chauncey Billups, I mean, does he need the money? Like, why is he involved in something like this? I don't know, but really disappointing. I also, the mafia still exists.
Yeah, I mean,
Apparently, apparently it does.
I think we'd be deluding ourselves to think that there isn't still a mafia. It's just, I guess, the question of like, what do they actually control? And apparently, it's gambling rooms, which kind of makes sense.
Apparently. All right. So that was part one. Part two is more, I mean, I find that one kind of intriguing to talk about, but that's not everyday real life. That doesn't touch most of us. But the second part does. I think we all know that it was 2018. I think that the rules started changing because the Supreme Court overturned a sort of gambling prohibition. So you used to just have the gambling in Vegas, but now you've got gambling basically everywhere. You can do it on your phone. You can go to sports books. In some stadiums, I didn't know this until catching up with on this story. Actually, you can bet inside of some of the stadiums of I guess it's the NBA, NFL, etc. Now, I thought it was just happening on your phone, but in any case, most of my friends gamble. I don't personally. I just don't think it's that fun, or I don't know. I just hate losing money, I guess. But for most of my buddies, they're like watching the game and they want to bet. And what's really like apparent to me, or has been, is as I've learned from my buddies about this, they bet on all sorts of things. It's not just who wins or loses the game and by how much, but it's like who's going to get is Tyreek Hill, and this is a bad example, but is Tyreek Hill going to get 8 receptions or more or less than 8 receptions on whatever day? And that is like, you can bet on just about anything. You can bet during the game. You can bet who's going to win the second quarter or the fourth quarter, who's going to score more points or less. And as it pertains to this example, you can bet that a certain player is going to, as they say, make more points or less. And you had an NBA player from the Miami Heat essentially say he was going to be out of the game after the second quarter, which gave people who knew that information the ability to bet that he was probably going to make fewer points than whatever was predicted that day. So if it's hard to fix a whole game, but it's pretty easy if you're the player on the other end to know whether or not you're going to score 10 points or more. That changes the dynamic of the whole interaction.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of going on here. First is, it kind of reminds me of a story at that parade that I went to that my daughter was in for the Halloween parade. The guy I was standing next to was like really stoked because he had bet on the LSU game, and he had bet a substantial amount of money that he won based upon one of these kind of little side bet sort of weird things associated with the behavior in the second quarter of LSU versus A&M. And he was stoked. He was like really excited next because he had won a fair amount of money, and like north of 5 figures actually. So like, and you're just
Whoa.
like, and you're like, dude, I just met you like standing, watching your kids like grab candy from the floats, and you're throwing that kind of money. And I'm like, I live in an all right neighborhood, but like it ain't that all right, where you're throwing that much money out there. Like, so like that's a guy with like a problem, frankly, that like I would,
yeah.
But the other part is, it makes me think of, I think you and I have had careers where we get our risk taking from just a career. Put an airplane into, into the sort of maneuvers that we were doing, or, being an entrepreneur. Like, I got all the risk I need, man. Like, I'm good. Like, I don't need to, I don't need to spice it up with like poly market betting or something.
Yeah, I'm with you. Maybe this goes back to the opening, which is, I just don't get it. Like, I don't understand the need for that kind of excitement. I feel like anyway, it just doesn't do anything for me, but I don't begrudge anyone who wants to do it. If that's how they get excitement out of their day, then okay. I have thought societally it was maybe better for us to have gambling like tucked into a quarter in, southern Nevada, And if you wanted to gamble, cool, go to Nevada for a week and or weekend and do your gambling and then come back to normal life. Maybe again, this is very personal, but I always feel like when I leave Vegas, even if I've been there for like one night, I need to like take a shower and like wash all the dirtiness off of me.
Yeah. There's a subconscious part of that, man. Like, there's two things that this kind of drives me to thinking is like a couple of influencers on the social medias. One's a guy named Scott Galloway, who I think you've listened to before. And the other one's this gal named Kyla Scanlon, who I think does like this really cogent kind of review of economics. I've actually met her, so she's just as cool in person as she is on the internet. And she was the two of them. Like, one is from the Scott Galloway side of things, is he talks about like how like there's this need for men to take risks, and that's risks when it's out there in dating or in their careers. Like, there's this component of like we have to take risks. It's part of kind of who we are as men. And so sometimes I wonder. Is gambling actually taking from men's greatness? Because they're scratching, just like you and I. We flew airplanes in crazy places, and we're trying to start companies, and we take those risks. And so, like, if you can satisfy that risk-taking need by betting on some goofy friggin' stat associated with the second quarter of a college football game that'll be forgotten, like, are you really stealing from that man's ability to like actually take a calculated risk to go do something better?
Super interesting. I hadn't thought about that at all. I guess how about this? Let me ask you it this way. Would that be diminished if it was only sometimes available? Like where my mind was going, my previous point was like, if you're just saturated in if it's always available to you and you can never get separation from that, call it, dirty pleasure or whatever it is. I mean, I like, we all have our own little, like, I like to watch, I like to watch trashy, like when I'm totally brain dead, I watch the worst possible TV shows. Like I'm like embarrassed to admit what I watch.
Big fan of The Bachelor.
I'm not even going to say it. My wife makes fun of me and I deserve it. But I'm okay. Like I'm okay saying that we all have our thing, right? Whatever that is.
Ancient Aliens. I'm trying to guess what this trashy show is that you're watching.
I mean, maybe someday I'll admit it.
Okay.
But yeah, it is. But like, I don't begrudge anyone having their little vice, whatever that is, their like dirty little secret to like completely detach from reality. I kind of felt like gambling was that for some people. It was like a way to detach or to take a mental break or whatever. I think you're tapping into something that makes more sense to me, which is it's feeding some other part of their brain. But I guess my broader question is, what happens when you can't get away from it? Is it a good thing to have it ubiquitously available, or is it better to be tucked into the sort of Sin City worlds, like Vegas and maybe the Indian casino that you have to drive 3 hours to get to?
Yeah, so I think that touches to the second influencer, the Kyla Scanlon sort of stuff, and even like to South Park. There was a South Park episode fairly recently. It was talking about the poly market, and you can bet on anything. And in the South Park episode, it was all about like, is Kyle's mom going to like nuke the Gaza Strip or something like that? I can't remember what it was, but it was not Kyle's. It was Kyle, the Jewish one. Anyways, so it was very much about like, why are people betting on all these sort of things? But the larger point is the one that Kyle Scanlon was talking about, is the idea that like we're kind of in this casino economy anyways, where there's so much like, first of all, there's like millions of stable coins and meme coins and all these other things that like are totally quasi sort of legal, that, enough that the president's making billions of dollars off of them, for example. Like, it's got enough of a legal cover that you can do that. Even in, public equities investing kind of feels a little bit like there's meme stocks that just go up without any degree, or down without any degree of rationality, just because it's like some sort of component associated with that, and so like, I don't support Chauncey Billups, but I think maybe he, if he wants to be a criminal or crook, he was thinking too small. That like there are better ways that where you can, to do some crimes apparently in public and kind of with enough cover that you can drive your own money associated with that. And then all you have to do is have some degree of fame.
Interesting. Well, so what you're highlighting there, I think, is the parallel, and this may be hard to explain, but I'll do my best. The parallel between crypto and, to be honest, we're getting ready to see private companies be available for public investing. Sounds very strange, but if you're not following this is the current administration wants to open up the ability to invest in private companies with your 401k, which you can already do to some extent. There's some nuance to this, but you can use your 401k to make private investments, but they're going to sort of broadly expand that. The challenge with that from really is, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commissions, their job is to level the playing field to the extent that is possible. And there's a lot of subjectivity to that. And I'm not an SEC guy, but I know that the premise is you can't, insider trading is illegal, for example. You can't, rig the system. And insider trading specifically addresses public markets. So think the stock market. And as soon as you get into a world in which you're allowing people to put their 401ks into private companies at scale, then you're opening up. It's like, why was the SEC created in the first place? It was created essentially to level the playing field. But, that scenario is one in which the playing field will not be level by definition. One of the things I got out of business school is investing is all about information. If you have more information, you're going to do better. Anyway, bring this back to the gambling thing. The challenge here is my buddies are betting on what's going to happen in the second quarter with a certain player in a certain scenario, whatever. They are doing that on the faith that, sports is sort of the last remaining, honest, it's going to get solved on the field kind of scenario. I think that may be part of the appeal there. I've actually heard people, not in the betting context, but I've had some of my buddies talk about sports in that way. It's everything else is rigged. Sports, at least it gets solved on the field. But now we're talking about, that's not even true. And so there's this is the parallel I'm trying to draw here, is that sports are rigged. These private market investments, those are definitely going to be rigged. Crypto, sorry, but I have not invested in crypto, in part because I don't have as much information, and I know it's rigged. I just don't know how it's rigged. And so I've stayed out of it.
Yeah, the fix is in. Again, that's the kind of the casino economy. The idea here, though, is that the house always wins in a casino. And so there's the same sort of thing here. The people that are setting this up are designing it so that they win and you're going to lose. From the startup standpoint, you always had to do these accredited investors, which is you have to have over $1 million of liquid assets, not including your home, or you have to have over I think $200,000 of individual income a year, or $300,000 as a married couple. The idea that people with more financial means aren't going to lose their entire retirement. Probably they're also going to take smaller, more educated bets, well within their means. And that's just kind of all falling apart. Why does the SEC even exist if you can invest your whole retirement into some scam? And really, that's kind of at the core of what it all is it's not really a casino, because casinos, the ones that aren't being run by the mob, at least have some degree of legitimacy about there's known percentages of how the win and the take and all the, casinos make a lot of money, except for the one that Trump founded. So why do you have to get involved in stealing? Because you already are kind of printing money to a certain extent. So can you not run at least a semi-honest casino? But it's just at the core of it is grift, is the idea that you're going to find the bigger sucker and you're going to steal their money, and you're going to claim that it's legal because, all's fair in business. But really that is just sociopathy. You're justifying something that's completely unethical with something that is. And in the case of all these major sports leagues that have cozied up to this, I think they're going to all be finding kind of their 8-man out, sort of experience, which is they're going to be damaging their brand, to your point, which is this. If you don't even think that the players are being honest, the game itself is honest, why would you watch? So
I think they've already. I cannot imagine they're going to back away from it because it's one of the smartest things the NFL has done over the last 10 years is fantasy football. Like my wife watches football now. She wouldn't have watched a game if you had paid her. But now she's in a league with her friends and she doesn't like to lose. She's highly competitive. So now she's got a fantasy football team. So now she's like cheering for NFL games that she otherwise wouldn't care about. And that's just social capital, right? I don't know. I guess she puts $20 into the fantasy football league. But anyway, if I think for the same reason, the sports leagues are driven by revenue, that revenue is gotten by eyeballs. And sports betting has been really good for eyeballs too. I have no data. I just know it's true. Like I'm making a little bit of a statement there because I haven't actually looked at the data, but I am 100% confident that the NFL has driven up viewership by, fantasy football and sports betting.
yep. Well, speaking of accredited investors, maybe switching a little bit here to a different topic there. So if anybody's ever watched the show Silicon Valley, which is probably required reading for any CEO of a tech startup, one of the early moments in the show that's like really important for him is this big pitch competition known as TechCrunch Disrupt. And that's coming up here pretty soon. And so it's definitely kind of a who's who of the up and comers within Silicon Valley. And so that's coming out there. So the top 20 have been announced, the ones that are going to be going up in this, pitch competition head to head associated with that. Anything kind of catch your eye there, Neal, as far as the list associated with that?
Yeah, I mean, there's several. I mean, not shockingly, I sort of gravitate towards the energy companies, and in particular,
Really?
what you're seeing. I know, shocker of the day. Look, there's a few that are successfully navigating the sort of energy AI space, and I don't mean like powering the AI specifically, but how do you, if you look at where the opportunities are, COI Energy is a really good example of, how do you, monetize the excess capacity. So I think there's an interesting one from my standpoint. And I think there's a few others that are, trying to, if you take the assumption that a rack of compute is going to be a megawatt, then how do you get a megawatt to a single rack? That's one big question. And then two, is there really more of a DeepSeek opportunity? And DeepSeek is the Chinese firm that actually is saying, or is claiming that they can do similar compute with far less consumption. And I think there's a few that potential players in that space. And then, and the second thing is like there's also some defense tech companies. Skyline Nav AI is one that I think if you really look at the future of the battle space, where most everything we see on the battle space today, we came up in the era where GPS was being introduced and then became relied upon. And now we're finding that GPS is disruptible. And so there's new technologies. Skyline is one of them, delivering GPS independent navigation for things like drones and, other sort of battlefield infrastructure. So those are a couple that I'm interested in. How about you?
So I'm most interested in the second session of the semifinals. There's a couple of companies in there that like speak to my background. The first one is an outfit called Strong by Form. So it's a special material associated with manufacturing or with buildings. And so for those of you that are unfamiliar, my background before I started my current company was I did a big tree company. I planted a couple million trees associated with carbon offset production. And in that space, I got to know a lot about what was going on kind of in forestry and forestry tech. And one of the big ones that everybody was talking about was wood products associated with something known as cross-laminated timber. And so cross-laminated timber, from a climate perspective, is really great because you absorb all this carbon. There's a lot of these small diameter trees that don't have a whole lot of value from like turning it into 2x4s from traditional lumber, but you can kind of turn it into, you can, you know, just like you like would make plywood, you can get all these plies and you start stacking it together. And the reason it's called cross laminated is because you take one laminate with the grains going one direction, and then you cross it with another laminate going the other direction. And so there's a lot of the natural strengths of wood associated with that are built into that. And so certain places like Portland, for example, they had to start changing. They didn't have to, but they did start changing their regulatory stuff, and they started building, like, I wouldn't call them skyscrapers, but multi-story tall buildings built out of cross-laminated timber. It's got these really cool components of like, it's actually more fire resistant in some ways than others because of just like the density of the wood fiber. And you can also like prefab it. So it's kind of built in place. I knew a company out of Durango that was doing that work. But the big problem with CLT is that it's heavy as fuck. So, you know, how do you move it around, et cetera? And so what's kind of interesting about Strong by Form is that they've taken cross-laminated timber and they kind of reimagined it. And they reimagined it in the idea of like creating these kind of cross pieces where they've actually been able to shape the wood paneling and so that it actually starts forming almost like triangles. And so it's made it cross-laminated timber, but also more lightweight. And so it's a pretty innovative building product that is carbon negative. You know, absorb because of the fact that these little trees that we have to harvest out of forests, for example, anyways, in order to reduce fire risk, like we're actually preventing wildfire, storing that carbon. That carbon is captured from the atmosphere. It's kind of a really cool technology. So I'm excited to see that. But I kind of want them to lose.
Why?
Because I'm actually rooting for the other company that's in it. Is called Glide.
Okay.
And the reason I know that is because it's a friend of the show. A guy named Matt Mueller is the CEO of that company. And so Glide is EV autonomous vehicles that help to move freight from rails to trucks in a way that's really carbon efficient, reduces the cost of rail transshipment. So one of the biggest problems that you always have with this stuff is that, like, how do you move it from one place to the next? And there's a lot of bodies and people moving that stuff around. And so if you can make that more efficient, you can make rail networks more cost effective. That makes it a more interesting way to ship things. You know, a lot of things get driven all the way across the country just because it's kind of a pain in the butt in order to be able to move it from a truck to a train and back to a truck. But if you can pretty quickly get it, for example, if it came into the port of Los Angeles, gets put onto a train, gets shipped to Chicago, and then gets taken off and put on a truck and gets shipped to Milwaukee from there or somewhere within Chicago, then like you see this as being a much more efficient method of getting things across the country. So I'm rooting for you, Matt. And that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Very cool. When did these get announced? I mean, it's on the 29th, right? 27, 28, 29.
Yeah.
Do they get announced immediately, or how does that happen?
I think, yeah. So it says it's going to be announced at 4 p.m. on the 29th. So it happens PDQ, at least for the winner there. So we'll keep our fingers crossed. You know, the other thing I was looking at as far as all the people that were in it is how many companies are in AI. You know, obviously I gravitated towards the two that aren't. But you know, AI is the 800-pound gorilla that's in the room right now.
Yeah, I heard a stat the other day that really I haven't quite made sense of yet. But you know, we've been talking about how the market's doing fine and we can't explain it. And then somebody said AI is accounting for 40% of our GDP right now. And I went back and looked it up, and it's legit. I think that means a couple of things. One is, and I know I'm off topic here, but this has been on my mind, is one is that we said a couple of weeks ago, how is the economy still doing so fine, like doing well, given all these downward pressures, upward pressure on inflation, job market's down, et cetera? The answer is the market is up because of AI, not because of the fundamentals of the economy. And it's being propped up right now. And two, that also almost certainly means that AI is in a bubble. And what I mean by that is specifically the amount of cash being put into the sector. There's no way that amount of cash is going to come out of it, no matter how good it is. So there's an irrationality there that I will work on explaining in the future. But there's if it's 40% of the GDP, I'm just doing some math there. That's many trillions of dollars. And I'll go do the math, but that doesn't add up.
Yeah, it's a big one. It's deeply connected to our politics in a lot of ways too. You know, if the stock market wasn't doing well, one of the points going back to Scott Galloway, he's been talking about is like, do you think that Donald Trump would have the cover to do all of his bullshit? Nope. You know, like it's really covering up for a lot of other indiscretions.
You mean there's a conspiracy theory?
No, not so much that as just as like the public sentiment. Like, are you willing to kind of look the other way as long as your 401k is going up? Maybe. You know?
Yeah. You
know, but are you?
No, I meant that, and that's what I'm saying. It's like,
yeah,
there's a cabal.
Well, I don't think Trump is an honest actor. I think there's plenty of evidence associated with that.
What?
But
shocking.
But I think, you know, that it helps to explain why he's holding these tech titans so close, especially the Sam Altmans of the world, who he historically would not have thought of being like very Trump friendly kind of people. So I think there's a component there. I mean, like on the flip of the coin there, which is that, you know, a big part of the value judgment associated with like a Gavin Newsom being able to be like a national political figure is that like California's got the fourth largest economy in the world. Why has it gone from the eighth largest at the, you know, about 10 years ago to the fourth largest? That's AI and a lot of these tech companies associated with it. And so, you know, part of his claim to fame of being like this great leader is he's building this state and its economy into being like the, you know, the world's leading. But there's a little bit of a house of cards on both sides of this of like, you pull out that bottom card here, man, we can watch a lot of things start collapsing.
Yeah. Well, I guess the question is when that bottom card and going to be pulled out, and is it part of that poker game we were talking about before?
A little bit. It kind of feels like it. You know, as I was doing some research for this show, I came across an article. It was on a paywall, so I didn't get to dive into it, but it was talking about that some leading VCs are starting to recommend to their invested companies to go out and raise the next round now in AI because they're worried about that bottom card coming out, and there's an irrational exuberance associated with investing in AI right now. So I tend to get most excited about cross-laminated timber and like things that actually like change the world in a lot of ways, rather than kind of the frothy thing of the moment.
Yeah.
So moving on, maybe we can kind of switch gears here and talk about national security and talk about one of the world's greatest assholes, a guy named Vladimir Putin, and some reporting about how he's a little bit on the ropes. Did you get a chance to read that report?
Yeah, I mean, I start maybe a couple of months ago. We talked about how, you know, there was his regime when it began started socking away money, and they have been spending that down. They, you know, built up a big war chest and had been using it liberally to essentially hire a mercenary force of Russian soldiers who get paid, you know, multiple times more what they would get in the private sector. And yeah, I'm just starting with that because that's sort of I think the baseline for how I read this article, this report, is that, you know, there was always a time limit to how long he could sustain. And, but anyway, yeah, I'll turn it over to you to summarize it.
Yeah. So it's a big one about the NATO Secretary General, a guy named Mark Rutte, I think is how you pronounce it. I believe he's Danish.
I think that's a good accent. Yes, I think you nailed it.
I know some Danes, so don't ask me to say anything else Danish, but I think I got that one. But anyways, NATO's been, pretty central to this early on in the war. There was a little bit of hand wringing associated with how this was all going to go. Obviously, there was a good component of American leadership in driving some of this behavior, especially under kind of the Biden administration. But that obviously has waned, and the American side there waxed and waned. Maybe is the more accurate way to describe it. But it's American leadership is unsteady at best. But NATO has increasingly kind of stepped up into this role there, and Rutte was pretty bullish about like what's going on in Ukraine. Short version is that uh, the war in Ukraine is just bleeding Russia dry of men and materials, and they are not. It's kind of a classic problem for all authoritarians: is you have to take power quickly, otherwise, like resistance can build over time. And so, in the particular case of this war, he didn't get power quickly. He knew he needed to. He tried to. He failed to. And it's been this slow grind as it's moved across eastern Ukraine. And they are advancing, but like the cost is just incredible. So, like some of the reporting out of this is that Russia is now sending men to the front lines that have HIV or other like deadly communicable diseases. And in like a really gruesome, pure calculation sort of standpoint, like if they're going to die anyways, you might as well send them into the war machine. But it also is an indication that they don't have a whole lot of able-bodied men left. And so, you'll never be able to get around the idea that wars are won with boots on the ground, grunts doing the work of being a grunt. And if you're sending in, really sick people, they're not going to be particularly effective soldiers. And so like there's like this case for optimism that Rutte knows they're going to backstop this. They're going to support it. Trump seems to have kind of is on the waxing side of this about like he's more supportive of operations in Ukraine. So, so good news for the good guys, I guess here.
Yeah, I mean, well, generally positive pants here, but I'll start with a little bit of caution, which is that it's in the interest of Rutte and NATO to paint a picture that we're getting close, because they're trying to rally support from the Europeans, and this has been dragging on for a while, and so they're rightly, they're trying to stir up some optimism. That said, two things with some positivity here. I think Modi from India has said that they're going to start buying less oil. That Trump's strongman type stuff seems to have maybe had some impact on others. Quote unquote starving the sort of supply chain of cash to Putin. I think he's going to have a really hard time getting China to buy any less, but buying anything less is helpful. And I think, I'm maybe in the minority when I gave Trump less credit for all of the sort of the quote unquote, Middle East Gaza victory, but I give him quite a bit more than I think he's getting on this. I think it's been more effective than I expected it to be to get people to buy less, to get countries to buy less Russian oil. But to go back to my negative pants, the thing that I know negative pants are out. I don't think we're anywhere close to the amount of pain Putin is willing to foist on his own people. I think he cares most about power and his legacy.
Yeah, there's no way. No, he doesn't give a damn about the Russian people. He's in this to, his back's against the wall. He'll go until you kill him.
And so that's where I'm going. I think like he's going to feel pain. The Russian people are going to feel more pain than him for sure. And then I think we also have to acknowledge where this leads. in every sort of diplomacy textbook, there's always like, give them an off ramp. Don't box them into a corner, especially if they have nuclear weapons. But we should do that. And I think, look, Trump's done a fine job of essentially giving him Putin what he's asked for, and in the negotiations. So I'm not saying Trump and the administration aren't doing that. I think we need to be real about what that off ramp is and continue to offer the off ramp, because you don't want to paint a nuclear power in a corner where they have no other options. And if Putin especially thinks his only option for his legacy is the nuclear option, then we're all in trouble.
I think I agree with that to a certain point, but at a certain point also, like, this world is going to have to figure out, because we have enough nuclear armed states now, that what do you do when, like, is there a consequence for this? One of the things that they were talking about in the article that I shared with you is from the National Security Journal, was a little bit about like that off ramp there, which is the idea of like, what would be reparations to Ukraine associated with this, right? And so there has to be, and this, I think this ties back to our conversation a couple of weeks ago about like dishonesty from the oil companies around climate. There's got to be a consequence that prevents you, from doing this again, from other people being like, there is a calculus that if I do this, this is going to hurt me as an individual. And clearly it doesn't matter for like the Russian people, because again, Vladimir Putin will kill every Russian person if it means that he gets to live another day longer. Like, that's all he cares about, right? As long as he holds power and he gets to live. So there has to be some sort of consequence for him, where it is for the despot, the dictator, the authoritarian that says, I will sacrifice everybody for my own personal gain, where he goes, ouch. Maybe it doesn't involve him, being put against a wall and shot, or, the better case in kind of a rule of law sort of scenarios where like he's tried by the International Criminal Court and then found, guilty of all the war crimes he's actually committed. Maybe it's short of that, but like, what is the consequence? And I haven't seen that yet. And so we have to figure out, how does a despot that has control of nuclear weapons learn that they do not get to use them as cover for offensive operations? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, I think big question marks. I don't know. I mean, I think it's, there's so many unknowns there across the spectrum. I don't know. I both positive and negative pants on that one. I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe it's just kind of the question mark that is open here, but I'm not as afraid about, like, I wouldn't say back him into a corner so much, but like, let him back himself into a corner where like he can't lash out against somebody outside because it was of his own doing. He doesn't get to complain that Ukraine is defending itself. And so like, how can he, face repercussions from his own people? And I think that's probably the best, is how do we enable people inside of Russia to stand up to this?
Well, I think, let me pick up on that. I think the way out here is not just that Russia wins, but also that Ukraine loses. I think he cares about the perception of what story can he say in history. And part of this has been about punishing Ukraine. I mean, actually, you think you could say the same thing about, Trump's going to go meet with Xi in Korea this week. And there's an element of that too. I think for the win, both sides want to see the other lose to some extent for them to be able to really claim victory. And I think for Putin, this historical context that's why I think, when I say painting him in, or, backing him into a corner, it's also, what narrative gives him an off ramp, and, both with Russian winning and Ukraine losing.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is exactly, but I think it's got to encompass both of those things.
I'll have to give it a little bit of thought there. Well, maybe to end this show on a more positive news story associated with it, which is that renewable energy just keeps on trucking. Some reporting out of Canary Media associated with that, the world just continues to grow in its adoption of renewable energy, very specifically around the generation of solar electricity. So that's pretty
Mm.
exciting. And it brought to mind, actually, I was reading a Substack article from Paul Krugman, and I only read the first half of it because I don't pay him for it. But it was what I really liked.
Yep.
Dr. Krugman, I guess he's a Nobel Prize winner. I think he's a PhD. He's got to be
He's
right.
amazing. Yeah,
But
totally.
anyways, the very opening of that he talks about, if anybody remembers the Dick Cheney energy report back in the early part of 2001, and very specifically in that report, it expected that non-hydropower renewable energy was expected to account for about 2.8% of total electricity generation in 2020. Um, and that, like, when you look at the Canary Media report, the reality is that it's closer to 20%. Like, the world is rapidly moving to renewable energy, and it ties into that story that we were talking about, like AI, frankly, which is like, how are we going to power all these server racks, which are weirdly enough, at the scout camp thing that I was doing this weekend, I was talking to a guy that a few years ago started a company that's a general contractor for data center build outs. They have business coming out of their ears, and he really referred to AI as a problem of densification, where the way that you used to build like server farms, like, yeah, it would consume a fair amount of electricity associated usually with like heating and cooling of the facility, trying to maintain like a constant temperature so the servers would run pretty well. But now, like you were talking about, like a megawatt, for a single server rack, like a huge electricity consumption, and it's not just for heating and cooling. It's really more now just for the fact that these processors are just running all out all the time, and they're built for just massive energy consumption associated with that. So, you know, when I think that's just like unalloyed good news that despite what the U.S. is doing, is that renewable energy is on the march.
100%. I think this was another, I think I mentioned this last episode, which is, you know, the wind market, we forget the US is 8% of the global wind market. So it feels in my circles, wind and solar in particular, feels a little doom and gloom because the IRA got rescinded and got to get the last projects built. And it's a sprint between now and next July. But after that, what are we going to do? Um, but this tells the good news, or positive pants story here. I will note as a sidebar that the IEA is almost always wrong. I think notoriously overstates, but they're in the right order of magnitude. I think if you go back in history and look, they're off by, a good chunk, but they're directionally correct. And I think that what you see here is in part what is possible. But I want to come back to the broader point here, which is that this momentum is happening because of economics, that hydropower and wind and solar are super cheap forms of electricity. And, again, I'll come back to this point that, wind was about 100 gigawatts a year. They predicted to be 700 gigawatts a year in the next 5 years. The US is a very small part of that. So it's, is it sad that the wind and solar subsidies are going away in the US? Sure. But this is a bigger global trend, and, one administration isn't going to derail the overall trend.
Yeah, there's a couple thoughts that come out of that for me. One says, one is the IEA is always wrong. You're right; they're directionally correct about like that it's going to grow, but they're always wrong by how much it's going to grow, and they always underestimate. They don't really think about it like an entrepreneur would, which is that like you have exponential growth. They just think about it as like linear growth. And so there's like this really, I'm sure you've seen it, like this really fun chart about like, oh, if we just extrapolate it out of here, it's going to be to there. And if we extrapolate it out here, it'll be to here. But like, that's not like, they're extrapolating like, what is the average growth over the last 2 to 3 years? and look that forward rather than what's the average percentage growth over the last 2 to 3 years and extrapolate that out. And that percentage growth is compounding, which is why you
Yeah.
just see this much bigger. So like there's that. But the other part that you kind of talked about there is that I'm actually okay with kind of the tax credits ending to a certain extent. Like the baby bird's ready to fly.
Mhm.
It's we got it, we got that industry, out of the, off the ground, out of the nest, whatever metaphor you want to use. The problem I have with it is that we were giving it away. Like that was our industry.
Yeah.
We built it. We're allowing everywhere else in the world to lead. And if we allowed renewable energy to compete fairly in the US market, it would be fucking winning. But we were putting our thumb on the scales as a society in order to make sure that oil and gas wins and that renewable energy loses. And that's maybe good for oil and gas companies in the short term. It's not good for America in the long term. And it will cost ratepayers more right now, especially as all these AI data centers come online and start jacking up the consumption of the grid. So, yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. If I could drop everything and I had $100 million to put somewhere right now, just purely as a unemotional, externality free investor,
Meme coins.
I would invest in gas. Sorry. I know where you're going with that. No, I would invest in gas. And it's because of what you said. Let me be more clear. The game has been rigged. I think the administration would argue it was rigged the other way before, but they're rigging it this way now. I mean, Chris Wright, the Secretary of Energy, is made his money in gas. He's very focused on helping his buddies. I think if you look at all of the sort of momentum of the industry, it points to gas. I think if you look at what people are building and what they're likely to build in the very near term, it's going to be predominantly gas. That's not good for the climate. It's not good for the folks who live around those plants. Look, we were never going to get away from building gas. I think to your point and we sort of violently agree here is from an energy security standpoint, the fastest, lowest cost energy has been solar and wind, and we are ceding all of that territory to China in the midst of the geopolitical hegemonic struggle. And it's just not good energy security policy to do that. We need all of it. We need the gas. We also need the wind and solar and the geothermal and the hydro and all of the rest of it if we're going to compete with China. And so we're advantaging one industry because the administration wants to, and it's just not good for overall energy security.
Yeah. I think the game is rigged is probably going to be the title of this episode. The only thing we didn't talk about is maybe how TechCrunch Disrupt is rigged too. So I've got no inside information on that, but maybe we can go conspiracy theory on it, man.
Yeah, I have no idea, but if it works for the title, might as well go with it.
Yeah. So we'll see there. So the game is rigged is the episode of this the name of this episode. All right, man. I think we've talked ourselves out a little bit here. Maybe we can go ahead and finish up with our goods, bads, and others. Tell me what's good in your world, dude.
So good. I was going to talk about my time with grandma, and it was awesome. But I actually thought, I had a second thought about it. I actually have been fascinated by the World Series this year.
Sorry, grandma, you got booted.
Yeah. She knows I love her.
Yeah. She's not going to listen to this podcast anyways.
She probably isn't. That's okay. Look, take game 4 of the Brewers Dodgers.
Oh my God. What a game.
I mean, I tried to explain, my 11-year-old is a baseball player. He plays baseball 6 days a week. And I was trying to explain to him the gravity of what we had seen. And I just couldn't do it. Ohtani is in 100 years, we're going to be talking about Ohtani everybody talks about Babe Ruth, or we should be, because what he did just in that one game and what he does as a player is just incredible.
For those unfamiliar, Ohtani is a pitcher that also hits, and he on one of the biggest stages in the world, pitched 6 innings of 2-hit, 0-run baseball, specifically with 10 strikeouts, which is like a world-class performance. And then on the other side of the game, as a hitter, hit 3 home runs. The second home run, which completely left Dodger Stadium, all 3 of them over greater 400 feet. Like, just like, they weren't wall scrapers. These were just absolutely towering, like, fuck you
Yeah.
home runs from like one of the world's nicest people, right? He's actually a really nice guy as a baseball player, but
Right.
he just, man, he took it out on those baseballs.
Totally.
So yeah.
Yeah.
He's
So
a
you know what
modern
I'm
day
saying?
Babe Ruth, but like more.
But more. He's the most amazing player. Certainly, like any of us have ever seen. It's hard to get an 11-year-old to appreciate just, he doesn't know the context. But anyway, and then put that in the context of the World Series now, where the Blue Jays have just been playing out of their heads. Their offense is amazing. They have a team dynamic that I think points back to teams of the past. Like if you look at like the Phillies a couple of years, like that where you look at the team and you know that they've gelled and they're playing for each other and they're just in a different headspace. The Blue Jays are in that headspace. You can tell. And they're up against this juggernaut of the Dodgers, who just, by the way, are also kind of, if you've ever listened to the Mookie Betts podcast, you know that team also, Dave Anderson keeps that team together. They've got some of the best players, but it's also, they play a really smart brand of baseball. Anyway, all of that is to say it is fascinating. And then you layer on top of this that of all years in the midst of a trade war with, some of our best friends internationally, you've got this international dynamic of Canada versus the US.
Yeah.
Yep. I think it's all in all, I don't think this game is rigged, for the record. I think these players are actually all going after it as hard as they can. And, I think it'll be, game 3 is tonight, and we'll see how it goes.
My favorite.
This is why we watch sports.
Yeah, it's been a great first 2 games to the series so far, and but yeah, just thinking about that Ohtani game, probably the best baseball game played by a professional player ever. Right. Like, I think a lot of people are saying that, and like, there's no joke. I mean, all you need is to watch the reactions of the guys that were in the bullpen, or for like Freddie Freeman from that second home run. They were literally just like holding their heads going like, oh my God, what is happening? Like, these are the best baseball players on the planet. And they were watching Ohtani going like, who the fuck is this guy? He's just amazing. No, it's great baseball, man. The first game too, when the Blue Jays tacked 9 on in 1 inning on the Dodgers.
Oh yeah,
against Blake Snell, who's like a phenomenal pitcher, but they just made him look foolish. Like, they're vibing hard, man. It's fun baseball.
Yeah. All right, so that's my good. But bad is kids ruin everything. That's my sort of phrase of the last few years. Is like, I keep getting germs from my kids, and I keep asking them to wash their hands. Anyway, you probably don't hear it anymore, but I'm just getting over like a week of just having this awful cough, and I'm really upset about it. But I'll move on. The other is Heirloom is building stuff. So we have foundations in the ground.
Yeah.
We've got like the vertical poles are going up. And that's just super exciting. So I'm like on the edge of my seat to see how it all comes together.
You're getting that risk profile, man. Like, you're scratching that risk right now, hoping like everything that you've been selling is going to actually work the way you said it should.
Yeah, that's right. So excited for it, though, man. Excited for it.
Congrats, man. That's exciting. I know that's a watch. It's an other, because you're like, you want it to pay out, but you're the man. You got this. It makes me think about what's that guy? Mark Andreessen. He wrote a couple years ago about like, let's do the builders, and then he ends up like funding grifters effectively. And so like, I think about like, there's people that actually build shit. And like, good for you, man. Like, you're building something. Like, you're literally building the future, and I dig it.
Yeah. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
It's well earned. On my side, my good is that we're getting a new-ish car. So kind of excited about it. It's funny.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're going to become a 2 EV family. So we already have a little Chevy Bolt that we use for getting in and around town. But about a month ago, I think I told you about like, I had to change the battery on my old Ford, and Just a total pain in the butt. Anyways,
Yeah.
about 2 weeks after I changed that battery out, it died again. So I was like, okay,
Yeah.
this is more advanced than just like, battery change. Took it to the shop. They identified it as I thought it was. That there was this
Yeah.
cable that had to be replaced associated with it. It's got like some weird like sensor kind of built into the cable, like thanks Ford. But in that component, like they also
Uh-huh.
identified that there was actually, because they did a full car inspection, they're like, actually, there's a lot of maintenance that's kind of built up on this thing that needs to be happening. New shocks and struts,
Yeah.
a couple other things. And so like, there's going to be a fairly major bill for all that. And I was like, I don't really want a gas car anymore. I've been wanting it, but like I had no reason to do that. So it's just funny, like how like one little trigger point turns into a cascade of events. So
Mm.
changing the battery, found out that I needed to take it to the shop, found out that I needed to have all that. That all decided that, you know what, maybe it's time to get that second EV. Went out, we
Mm-hmm.
decided we're going to get a Chevy Blazer EV. There's
Okay.
there's a bunch of them that are coming off of their like 2-year leases. So the 2024 version. Ours only
Okay.
has like 7,000 miles on it. So it's practically a new car anyways.
Yeah.
So we're excited about that, but that's like about a foot longer than our Ford Escape was. And we have a small garage. And then I was like, okay, well, I've got to clean out the garage. I've been wanting to do that for a while. So like I spent the weekend
Okay.
cleaning that out. And so like the garage is spotless, but now that's like,
Yes.
cascaded into, I've got to do some work in the yard because like there was a bunch of this gardening equipment. I'm going to need to store it here. And so anyways, so it's long story short, like there's been a lot of things happening in the Smith home. And I'm quite excited about having my second EV car, and a clean garage at this point too.
Good on you, man. Okay. Good. Just to reciprocate there, I love my Jeep. I have a 2014 Jeep Grand Cherokee, and it's still gas. And I get these because I'm a clean energy guy. Like, why don't you have an EV? And my answer is one, because a new car has a bigger carbon footprint than a new EV. Fine. But I also just love it. But it hasn't died yet. And I'm like, it's 11 years old now. And so I'm with you. I'm waiting for that. Like something is going to drop where the cascade opens and then I've got to go do all that, whatever you just did, including clean out the garage, but I haven't had it yet.
There's some cool cars that are coming onto the market, both in the used and the new.
I'm ready.
You can't get around Denver at all without seeing a new Ioniq 5, the Hyundai. It doesn't quite have the ground clearance that I'd want, but it's an all-wheel drive kind of crossover vehicle. Found out why as I was doing this, and it's because they're now on lease for 2-year leases, 10,000 miles, only $1,000 down for $150 a month.
Oh my gosh. You can't afford not to get that.
Almost like if it's your third car, if you have a lot of commuting, you might as well get something like that for an EV, just to save on your gas bill. Like it's kind of like almost a no brainer. So there's some cool stuff there, but there's a lot of these, like the first wave of like the major auto manufacturers kind of putting their stuff out was around 24. And so there's a ton of options as well. So, like this Blazer, it's got 300 miles of range. It's a really comfortable like road trip car. It's got the charging capacity that we could do that. With 300 miles, I can get from Denver to Utah, like the Utah border, without having to do a charge. What's really cool about it is like the supporting technology has matured a lot as well. So like, if I can talk to my car because it's got Google Assistant associated with it. So I'll be able to talk to my car and say, take me to Salt Lake if I wanted to. And along the route, it will plan out where I need to be charging, where the charge will be when I'm there. Like there's like zero range anxiety because your whole route just with a voice command, which is, I have to admit, pretty fucking cool. So
yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. And since we don't buy cars, but like we have 2 cars, we get one about every 5 years. It's almost always a little bit used. So like this car that it's replacing is, like an 11-year-old car, same as yours.
Yeah.
And like the technology increase in 11 years is phenomenal.
Yeah.
So it feels,
that's what I'm excited about. Yeah. Because I'm a tech geek. Like I want all the new stuff.
Yeah. There's some cool stuff going on there. Well, to spoil my good mood associated with my new car is the asshole in chief decided that he was going to bulldoze a national monument in the form of the East Wing of the White House. did it illegally, and did it only in a couple of like 3 days. It was gone. In order to build his monstrosity of a ballroom, and I didn't know it at the time, but apparently I'm one of the last people to see the East Wing. My family got to tour.
What?
Yeah, we got to
No shit.
yeah, we got
Oh my gosh.
we got we were back in DC last summer. Wanted to kind of show my kids like what the nation's capital was. Did the whole tour. Got scored some tickets to the East Wing of the White House, and got to that tour there. And now it's gone. And
Wow.
really historic parts of that building that, not to say that, buildings don't need renovation, but like this wasn't a renovation. They just fucking bulldozed it.
They just bulldozed it out.
They just
My
fucking
gosh.
bulldozed it. And it pretty much was,
Yeah.
it's clear to me is to force the hand, to force you to rebuild something. And the something that they want to build is like the whole White House itself is like 55,000 square feet. And they want to build a 90,000 square foot ballroom. I'm sure it's going to be fucking gilded in gold and, with flashing Trump light, neon signs on it or something. Like it's just, I couldn't think of a more apt metaphor for the destruction of our, of the presidency than like you literally bulldozed the White House.
It's like it is the metaphor that we've been waiting for. It's like the perfect metaphor because he's bulldozing the shit out of all sorts of things. Sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's exactly what it is. It is the world's most perfect metaphor for like what the Trump presidency is. And I just keep thinking about, we have to rebuild for the future. Like I keep thinking about like how the Trump presidency, the fact that we elected him twice actually shows how broken our country was. I almost don't really blame him. Like he is the symptom, not the disease. And the disease is that we had like every American institution was built for the 20th century. It wasn't maintained, and now it was creaking under the weight of change. And as a result, we're going to have to rebuild everything. And I think that's also going to be the metaphor here. Is like there's going to be some things that we have to clear out in order to rebuild for the 21st century. Everything that this asshole's touched is part of it. But we need to rebuild like the way the law works, the way the military works. We're going to need to rebuild journalism. We're going to need to rebuild everything. And so it makes me sad that a big chunk of our nation's history, some really famous things happened like in the East Room. And it's gone. It is just gone, and it was stolen. And so the game is rigged. He, and he knows that, and he's doing it whatever he wants because he knows that the game is rigged.
Yeah. Sorry. Let me just. I'll represent the folks that I've talked to here. Their perspective is, he's going to make it better. He's going to bring back 90,000 square foot beautiful ballroom that's the best in the world, and it's going to come back better than it ever was. My issue here is that it's like most of the things I object to with this president is that he goes about it in an American way. Whether or not it was the right decision is irrelevant to me. It might have been the right decision to tear down the East Wing and build something better. But he didn't consult anybody, and it's not his house. It's the people's house. And I push back a little bit. I actually think, based on what I've read, that it's not actually illegal. It's just wrong. Like, I think every other president has consulted with Congress and the historical societies and gotten input. Like, just get input from somebody else, anybody else. And, but no, this is why I say it's what I object to, is that what he ends up doing is a unilateral decision about something that should be a collaborative decision. And that's true on so many issues for this presidency. And it really, I'm with you that it's just very disappointing, and I think it's wrong. Yeah.
So that leads to my other, and my other is that Trump protests are expanding, which is an interesting thing. Some research coming out from the Harvard Kennedy School, which, for those unfamiliar, the Harvard Kennedy School is Harvard's School of Policy and Politics. And so they've got a lot of people that like study this material. And they found that Trump protests are not only increasing in the volume, like the number of people that are participating, such as the No to Kings protest, but also that they're starting to happen in places that are pretty Trumpy, places like counties that are like where the margin, like one one county that was referenced was had a margin of victory for Trump that was 50 percentage points. Like he beat Kamala Harris like 50 something to 20 or 70 something to 20 something. And you had it wasn't like 10 people, it was like 1,000 people showing up to a protest there. And so that is a change from the Trump 1.0, where the protests were all kind of centered in blue cities. I mean, we're starting to see some broad-based stuff associated with that. And I think it's mainly because the guy's so disdainful of even of his own core supporters, as we're seeing with like soybean farmers and like what's going on with the funding towards Argentina, and then like telling us like, hey, we should buy Argentinian beef. The one farming community that was doing pretty well was the beef industry, and so like watching the beef futures collapse associated with that, like, so it's just something I'm keeping an eye on. And economics does drive people's opinion of the world that they're in. So that's where I'm at. Anyways, that's it for this episode of Hardpoints. Thanks for listening and for being part of the conversation around energy, national security, and the startup world. If you found today's episode useful or thought-provoking, make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, if you are feeling generous, please share it on social media or send it to someone who would appreciate it. Thanks again for joining us. Hardpoints is brought to you by the Valor Media Network. One personal note, I want to thank Jordan Garuso as she moves on to the next phase of her career and helping to produce this. So we'll have that. But in any event, we'll see you all next time.